Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me and Dr. Camilo Gomez on a new episode of We're All Patients podcast. Today, I have Dr. Camilo Gomez, and he's a pioneer in neurovascular care whose career spans over 4 decades of groundbreaking clinical innovation, education, and leadership. As one of the nation's leading voices in stroke treatment and interventional neurology, Dr. Gomez brings a unique mix of medical expertise, teaching excellence, and systems thinking. He currently serves at the University of Missouri Medical Center, Comprehensive Stroke Center. He has also mentored generations of physicians across 4 major medical schools, but his impact goes far beyond the clinic. He's authored over 300 scientific works and 10 books, offering fresh, sometimes irreverent takes on medicine and life. Whether you're in medicine, education, or leadership, Dr. Gomez's story offers rich insights on innovation, influence, and resilience in high-stakes environments. Tune in for our conversation that's as thought-provoking as it is practical. Dr. Gomez, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm flattered that you invited me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, let's jump into it. So, what is the theory of constraints, and why should I or the audience care?
Well, as we were talking about earlier, I was so taken by surprise when you asked me to talk about theory of constraints, because a lot of people don't, as we said, a lot of people don't even know what it is. A number of years ago, an Israeli physicist named Eli Goldratt came up with this theory that he pushed, and then he became a consultant in different businesses, production lines, and so on. And the theory is actually very simple, and it has to do with the fact that any process, whether it is making cars, making widgets, giving a service, or in our case, medicine, any medical process, the process of a clinic, the process of an emergency department, the process of a hospital admissions, any process has one or more constraints. And by constraints is meant the element that dictates and controls, if you will, the rate of throughput of that process. And by manipulating that constraint, it is possible to increase the throughput of the process and optimize it. And without recognizing the constraints, what happens is what people used to do before theory of constraints became available or known is to try to optimize every component of the process. And in doing that, everybody thinks everything is working real well. I'm doing very well here, very well there. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really improve the process. For example, imagine an emergency department and a process of specific diagnosis of a patient or group of patients that have a specific diagnosis that have to go through, let's make it simple, triage, step number 1, the physician, emergency physician seeing the patient, step number 2, a CT scan, step number 3, and then a decision to either admit or discharge the patient. So 4 steps, 4 simple steps. And what happens is that, let's say that the triage is capable of seeing 15 patients per hour. The physician is capable of seeing 20 patients per hour. What do we think the output and the throughput of that process is going to be? Well, let's say that instead of 15 and 20, the CT scanner can only process 10 patients per hour. So no matter how many patients the physician sees, how many patients are seen in triage, the throughput of that process is going to be 10 patients per hour, no matter what. So unless we recognize that the constraint for the throughput of that process is the CT scanner, and we improve that either by getting a faster CT scanner or a second CT scanner that we can then process 20 patients per hour, then we're not going to improve the process. And what's going to happen is that there's going to be a bottleneck. And this constraint, which is also known as a bottleneck, patients are going to accumulate waiting to get the CT scan done. And that only gets worse hour by hour, if you think about it, because all of a sudden, the excess that is of patients that are coming into the scanner that cannot be processed begins to accumulate. And that happens in every single process across any industry, rather.
So it sounds honestly kind of straightforward. I mean, if I was just thinking while you were talking about that, about, let's say, like if you have a bucket of water versus like one of those water cooler jugs, right? That sit in like doctors' offices and things like that. So if you have a if you have a bucket with an equal amount of water as one of those jugs, and you flip it, the water from the bucket just comes out all at once. But the water from the jug would take, it just goes like glug, 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 and it just kind of flows for whatever, 30 seconds, whatever it is. And no matter how much you shake it, whatever, it's still limited by that opening, that bottleneck, that jug neck, I guess. And the, so even though they have the same amount of water, the bucket, because it has a much wider opening, just is going to spill out that water much, much faster.
Absolutely. So I think that, as you said, when I first learned about theory of constraints, when I went to business school back in 20 years ago, give or take, I was mesmerized by the simplicity of it. And it's something that when you see it for the first time, you should be able to say, why didn't I think of that? Right. No, I mean, I thought Eli Golar was a genius. I mean, when I heard him speak years ago, and the man was a genius, a simple guy, but an absolute genius when it came to manipulating systems and getting to the core of what makes a system work. And I think personally that if we were to adopt a theory of constraints, which dovetails very well with other process improvement tactics such as Lean Six Sigma, Lean Thinking, Six Sigma, and so on, it all dovetails very well. I think we would be better off in medicine, or what people call healthcare nowadays.
So if we adopt this in healthcare, or won't that naturally lead to more burnout for nurses, physicians, staff? Because here's one more thing you have to do. Like, here's one more thing you have to worry about, one more metric you have to follow.
Well, that's a very interesting question. I hadn't thought about it that way, but I don't think so. I think it actually would be the opposite, because it would give purpose to the tasks that we're doing. Don't you think, if you look around, I certainly view it that way, that we continue to overburden the people at the bedside with menial tasks that don't bring any value. And one of the concepts of theory of constraints, which also works for lean thinking, is value stream analysis. So look at a process and see what are the steps, which steps bring value to the entire process. In this case, in medicine, what brings value to the patient? One of the things that we teach residents, a resident X wants to do this test or that test on a patient, or wants to do this procedure or that procedure. And invariably, one of the questions we ask is, okay, how is that going to help the patient? And, many times, particularly the most junior physicians, look at you like, I hadn't thought about it that way. It just seemed like, it's in the guidelines. The guidelines say you should do this, you should do that. So one of my biggest concerns, if you will, at the present time, with our specialties or field of endeavor is what we're doing in medical education. And you and I have talked about one of my recent publications on that, and the issue that we are not really teaching critical thinking. Critical thinking leads to clarity of thought, and clarity of thought can then lead to the use of tools like theory of constraints. I think this is where it fits. It fits into a tactic. How do I go from point A to point B? How could you improve the throughput of your process if you don't look at the constraints, at what's constraining that process? And as we talked about the other day in some of the negotiating theories that you and I have been discussing, who would answer the following question in a bad way? The question: would you be opposed to unconstraining your system, your process? Think about that. And I think that's to me, that's where the money is, so to speak.
Yeah, I love that question. When you said it last time we spoke, I was like, huh, it sounds so cool, because it's you would never hear that question. I don't think anyone's ever said that question before. Like it sounds so simple and to the point, and also makes you think in a way that actually highlights constraints, in terms of, without the person you're talking with, your counterpart, knowing what theory of constraints is or anything like that, it actually kind of skips all of that kind of academic stuff and then jumps straight to the point, because everyone kind of understands at that point, when you ask it that way, that there's constraints that are holding me back. How do I unconstrain myself?
Why would you not want to do that?
Yeah.
Would you be against that? I don't think anybody. I mean, that's a perfect setup for this beginning a discussion like this. Is that who in his right mind could make a case that, no, I don't want to unconstrain my system? On the contrary, you do.
So speaking of that, then we talk a lot about. Well, let me go back a second. So healthcare is where it is now because, in part, we don't know how to. Physicians don't know how to talk with administrators. Administrators don't know how to talk with physicians, and not to mention all the other departments in the hospital. And with like the Chris Voss method, or if you want to call it the Black Swan communications method, or I think before that it was the Sandler method, which is still used. And then Sandler, one of his students was Jim Camp.
Camp,
right? And then
I was going to say the Jim Camp method.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So
yeah.
And then Chris Voss is a big fan of Jim Camp, so it kind of went from one name to another. But it's fascinating because those sales methods really are also a way to really, if used well and wisely, are great for being able to understand who you're talking with, understand their point of view, and being able to then, and then you can help each other basically see the bigger picture and kind of, how it impacts not just your side, but then now you understand how it impacts their side. And then you can come to a conclusion where, okay, well, how can we both really get what we want? How can we help the system as a whole improve without tying our own egos into it? Because at that point too, once you've been heard, you don't feel like you're threatened, right? Camilo understands how Sam feels, so then Sam doesn't feel threatened by Camilo about, that Camilo is just doing it for his own well-being, and he doesn't care what what Sam's needs are. So, with that, what is the big deal with empathy, and how will it help me get people to change what they do?
Well, as you know, I'm fairly adept to the empathy method of looking at conversations within people. Chris Voss is kind of the guru at that. And for those who are listening who may not know who Chris is, Chris used to be an FBI hostage negotiator years ago, and I met him briefly. I don't think he remembers that, but I do, because it was another time in my life. I met him briefly in Quantico many years ago. I happened to have been a tactical medical officer for a police department on a part-time basis, and We went to a course that we were invited, and he just happened to uh, uh, popped in, and I didn't make too much of it. And then years later, he published his book, Never Split the Difference, which is it's really transformative because it crystallizes Jim Camp's ideas and all of the other ideas about using empathy, what Chris Voss calls tactical empathy, which is a brilliant term in my opinion. I think this is exactly what it is the use of empathy in a tactical way. And empathy by that is meant really, empathy is a misunderstood concept. And it's a concept that is not widely or commonly taught. And I'm going to circle back to that in a second. But empathy is not sympathy. It's not just compassion for others, or I feel you, or I have your feelings, or anything of that sort. It's really about understanding, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, even if you disagree with them. You don't have to agree with anybody. You just have to make sure that they feel understood, because that is the path to behavioral change. And the FBI hostage negotiators have Gary Nessner and some of that other group that have written quite a bit about it, have what is known as the behavioral staircase model, where they start with active listening, rapport, empathy. And the idea is to move that ball all the way to behavioral change, to transform the behavior of others. And I think this is where empathy plays a big role, because whether we like it or not, I think that every one of us wants to be understood. I think that every one of us wants to be regarded. That the worst, and I say this all the time to people, the worst place to be emotionally, in my view, is when you feel that you're being taken for granted, when you don't matter. And that's what you need to avoid in any conversation. And this is where empathy comes very handy, because you essentially empower the other person without agreeing with them. You don't have to agree with them. This is the beauty of it. There's a misunderstanding. You have to agree. You don't have to agree with them. You just have to empower them to say their piece, to be heard, to be understood. And the interesting thing about it that I have found, both personally and through experience with others, is that how many times, for those of you listening, how many times do you think of something and you say it? And the moment you say it, you say to yourself, well, that sounded better in my head. And well, this is where you want the people to get to, the people with whom you disagree. You want to get them to the point where they say something, they state their case, and they say, and the moment they say it and it's out there, all of a sudden says, well, that didn't make as much sense as I thought it would. And then you can then piggyback into empathy, critical thinking, clarity of thought, and then begin to transform the conversation into a collaborative rather than an antagonistic approach. And the reason I got interested in this when I read Never Split the Difference is because it occurred to me that we as physicians are not systematically educated on this kind of tactic. And I wrote about it. I wrote a book chapter for one of Chris's books, Strategic Conversations. And I wrote about it because it was very transformative for me. We are educated in medicine to debate, not to negotiate. And the emphasis of debate is essentially verbal jujitsu. You are going to win the argument by virtue of you have the better argument and you want to come on top versus the opponent of the argument. It's a clinical argument, it's an administrative argument, whatever it is, as opposed to negotiating a solution that works at all levels and under all circumstances. And I have to tell you, I struggle, and I firmly admit it. I've talked to Chris about this. I struggle quite a bit with undoing the 45 years that I've been doing medicine, the bad habits of getting into a conversation and interrupting people and not listening actively. So it's a journey. It's a journey that we must recognize and one of the things that I think you and I were talking about is creating educational programs and master classes for physicians on how to adopt some of these techniques, because like I fully agree with Chris Voss and Jim Camp and those people that everything we do in life is a negotiation. Every interaction, we negotiate with patients to get them to understand that the treatment plan we have in mind is probably the best one for them. We negotiate with families of patients who don't seem to understand what we need to do. We negotiate with nurses at the bedside, with therapists at the bedside. We negotiate with hospital administrators. We negotiate with insurance carriers, with all sorts of people. So everything we do is a potential negotiation that we should be able to adopt some of these techniques, if that makes some sense.
So whether we know it or not, every interaction we have with someone is basically a negotiation. Mm-hmm. And I think to your point, I think one of Chris Voss's favorite phrases is the worst negotiation is one that you don't know you're in. Mm-hmm. And that has stuck with me because it's so as an example, I was recently at a hospital, and I was with the ER docs in their physician documentation room in the ER, and it was late at night, and there was a call from another ER across the city that had a patient that is a well-established patient of this hospital, and the patient wanted to be transferred from that ER, to this hospital. The problem was it was at night, and this patient had a lot of pain medications that they were on for their condition, and the pain management team wasn't in the hospital that late at night to help take care of the patient's needs. So the doctor was trying to relate this to the patient. I think that the other hospital put the patient on, and they were like, listen, this other hospital you're at, they're much better at handling your pain than we currently are. If you wait until the morning to come here, instead of like this middle of the night, we won't be able to do much here for you. You're going to be in much more pain than you would be if you stayed at this other ER. And they argued back and forth for an hour. And naturally, right, the physician kept kind of explaining more and more, right, with each kind of passing minute about why it's a bad idea to come to this hospital. Stay over there, not, wait a few hours, then come here. And the patient was not having it. They wanted to come here now, right? So at the end of the hour, it was like an hour and 15 minutes. The physician slams the phone. They're super frustrated. Man, like this, this patient just doesn't get it. We can't, they won't have, we won't be able to do much here for them. And the patient was probably on the other side saying, this physician doesn't get it. I feel like I'm at home at that hospital maybe, or I don't feel safe at this hospital that they're currently at. So all the physician had to do was, instead of explaining, listen, and I'm just going to say, like, Mr. Smith, it seems like you really like how we treat you at this hospital, at our hospital, and you feel like you would be in better hands here than you are anywhere else. You feel safe here. And by being at this other hospital, you feel like you're out of place. You're even though they're able to take care of you and your pain meds, you just don't feel right over there. And you want to come here and feel that connection with us that you normally have.
Yeah. So again, I think we can relate. I think all of us who've been practicing medicine for some time can relate to an anecdote like that, because we've been through this situation. What I have found invariably and painfully, that just because it's a struggle for me to do, I admit it. I have to undo, as I said, 45 years of bad habits, is what I have found invariably is when I use negotiating techniques such as the Black Swan method, which is Chris Voss's outfit, um, it works. It's like a Jedi mind trick. It's unbelievable, and you essentially get people to argue with themselves. Okay, I joke with my wife because I said it's like being a wife. That's what wives do. They make it look like it's your idea, so you go for
Right.
it. I mean, they do that all the time, you know. So I think that I think this is a very, very positive thing to do. As far as working, on everyday life, it's interesting. I don't know, relevant as it may be. There is a one night only Broadway show coming up in June about Chris Voss's life, and he is playing himself essentially for one night only. But the whole script is about how to apply these negotiating techniques to everyday relationships with your kids, with your family, with your wife, with your neighbors, with the other guy. And the techniques work. Well, guess what? They work in medicine. They work very well. They work with everybody. And it's not that you are manipulating anybody or anything. It's just a different way of approaching things. And at the end of the day, I think everybody walks away with a better taste in their mouth, if you will, of the interaction. We had one of our faculty members here who is an associate dean for one of those titles, education of something. He's our program director for the neurology residency program. Wonderful, brilliant guy. Gave grand rounds 2 days ago because we are supposed to have X amount of grand rounds on medical professionalism. And we talked about some of this, and how to apply these techniques to difficult situations at the bedside that can help both the faculty member, the learner, the patient, and everybody else involved in interactions that are difficult, just because that's the way life is. It's a series of random difficult situations, one on top of another,
It's like a way of putting it. Yeah. I haven't heard it put that quite that way before, but yeah, absolutely. A bunch of random situations that kind of determine the direction. So in your book, The Downgrading of American Healthcare, you share your perspective that physicians are the leaders of healthcare teams and as such carry the burden of responsibility and liability. With regard to the ability to lead with empathy and listening instead of debating, how would you go about teaching the current physicians on how to lead?
That's a very, very interesting question for several reasons. Before I answer directly the question, let me paint a little bit of where I think we are right now. When I wrote that book, which was 2012, give or take, that was many years ago. It was kind of my own intellectual catharsis about what I thought was wrong with the system. Well, the system hasn't gotten a lot better since then, I can tell you that. And one of the problems that I argued in the book, and I continue to argue, is that the interests of the physician community is not well aligned with the interest of the system itself and those who control the system or sort of control the system. And for many years, there's been this notion that, well, there is no I in team and that we're all equal. Well, I have news for you. Every team in the planet has a captain. Every football team has a captain. Every baseball team has a captain. Every unit in the military has a commanding officer. Every platoon has a platoon sergeant. Why? Because otherwise it's chaos and confusion. We're not all equal. Somebody has to take the burden of command. Somebody has to take responsibility. And over the last few generations or so, I think that the role of the physician as a leader has continued to be eroded and diluted. And I think I'm concerned that the newer generation of medical students and physicians are not being really taught to lead. They're being taught to follow checklists and guidelines that are imposed by people who are never at the bedside. And I think that's a problem. So how do we teach this? Well, by the same token, in parallel to that, in other sectors of the economy, leadership has morphed from the leader who just points at people and says, you got to do this or else, to the leader that is engaging, to the leader that is inspirational, to the leader that can look at somebody in the eye and say, look, you can do better. I know you can do better. You may not know it, but I have faith in you. And I can see how this is going to be good for you and your patients for the future if you invest in this. And then with that strategy, then bring tactics such as empathy and tactical empathy to deploy such thinking. But the thinking needs to be there to begin with. We got to be able to come to grips with the reality that without the physicians, there is no medicine. There is no, what they call the healthcare system doesn't exist without physicians. Medicine continues to be what I call in that book actually a dyad, the dyad between a patient and a physician. And when I say physician, please understand that I'm not excluding nurse practitioners and other folks like that, because we can all be grouped into the clinicians, if you will, appellative. So, but at the end of the day, for that patient, if you put yourself in the shoes of that patient, if you're empathic with the patient wants to hear and see that clinician, that physician, that nurse practitioner. They are not really concerned about, the system as a whole. Their micro environment, their micro universe is that dyad. And that dyad requires a bidirectional relationship in which there is trust from one side and commitment from the other. And that can be bridged very easily with negotiating techniques.
So it seems like what you're talking about is the relationship between the patient and the physicians can be managed much better using these techniques because you're building trust on the patient side and commitment on the physician side.
Absolutely. I think that every relationship can, if you think about it, every relationship requires a certain amount of trust and a certain amount of commitment, whether it's a patient-physician or a marriage. You got to have that. I mean, and the roles go back and forth, but there has to be trust and commitment, and of course respect. I mean, let's not leave respect out, but you got to have, that's a given. But trust and commitment. So think about it. Who is bound when having a relationship with you? Who is bound to have more trust in you? The person who gives you a forum to speak your mind, the person who gives you the opportunity to say your piece, who regards your view, whether he or she agrees with you or not, regards your view as an important view to consider, to take into account. Or the guy who just essentially says, you're going to do this or else. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense to do it any other way. And I think we can strive to that. One of the things that the Black Swan Group has done very well is have these training courses for people. And I've attended a couple of them here and there. And I tell you, one thing that they hammer constantly, which I'm completely convinced that they're correct about, is it's about practice. And I think you and I have spoken about this. Some of these techniques I use in emails, in everyday communications. And the more you use it, the more comfortable you become with it, the more it becomes almost muscle memory, if you will, that you are going to communicate in a certain way that automatically opens the door for the person on the other side to come across and say, okay, I'm in, I'm there with you. And that's, which is what you want.
Absolutely, yeah. I love practicing it in like low stakes environment, like when you're traveling, either at the airline counter, or at the hotel counter. At the hotel counter, if you need a room upgrade, like a great way of like a great way to practice is, or at least that in my experience, starting off with something like, "You look important," or "They told me you have all the answers." And then the other person would reply, and then you can be like, "I'm about to ruin your day." And then they might be like, "Try me." How much trouble would I get you in by asking for a room upgrade?
Those are
And
very,
then,
those are very good.
so the last time I just used it 2 days ago at a hotel, at a conference I went to, and the person at the front desk goes, "Listen, I'm the second most, high person at this hotel. Nothing you do, like getting your room upgrade, won't get me in trouble. Trust me." So, and then she, um, she did her best to get me in the best room possible. But she did it with a smile and like, happy to do it, versus me, like begging or yelling or using any other, techniques or anything else. It was like a nice, like it built rapport, and she was happy that I was kind of uh, chatting with her, and it was no sweat off her back to really help me out. So I love that, because it was a negotiation, but it didn't feel like one.
Yeah. I think that's brilliant. But I can tell you that what I have found most challenging for me, okay, I'm not speaking with anybody, but it's for me, because the rumor out there is that I have a hot temper. But it's only a rumor, okay? What I have found most challenging is dealing with, let's say your internet goes out at home and you have to call somebody to get it fixed. Those occasions when you're already irritated and your fuse is short, God knows that I'm trying as best as I can, and I can't claim success 100% of the time, but it's all about the journey and trying. And the last time this happened, it worked like a charm. Instead of yelling and screaming and just saying, "You guys, you're deadbeats, and you can't give me service," and so on, I started with tactical empathy, and I talked to them, and I started with how beautiful the day was, and how I heard that this is the person that could give me the information that I needed. And I had followed that from an email that I said, would you be against fixing my internet so I don't have to go to another service provider? And I got a response within an hour. Okay. And I didn't, it wasn't a threat or anything. I just said, would you be against doing this? And then I was very pleasant. The guy was so good. He fixed it us. He sent somebody home to fix it. He fixed all of the routers. I mean, it was pleasant interaction. And then I ended up giving him a good review on his website. Man, it was bliss. So the system works. The key for me is to get out of my own way, because again, I mean, I'm not a spring chicken. I mean, I've been doing this for many years, and I've been doing it wrong for many years, and it's difficult to fix that. But if you try, I guarantee that it will be more successful. You cannot guarantee 100% success, but it will be better than the old ways. Don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I've personally would love it if people talked with me in a way that like I make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time. If people were universally giving each other benefit of doubt and being able to say, seems like you had a good reason for doing that, or it seems like maybe the outcome wasn't what you wanted it to be, but like, just giving the patient, giving the person the benefit of doubt, and letting them say, yeah, that wasn't my best effort, or that really didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. I really messed that one up. And helping them really think through it themselves versus like yelling at them, like, how could you, don't you know that means a lot to me, and so on and so forth. So let me ask you this. I know you have to go in a few minutes. So with all these things that we just discussed, I love it because, honestly, it just, looking back on it now, it seems like common sense. But before I knew these things, they definitely were not common sense. I was always like, I have been for many years trying to figure out how to help transform healthcare. And, and it's like I was just kind of bumping my head against the wall or hitting my head against the wall for a long time. And then knowing these things, I'm like, it's become very clear. So how could we use these things to help unconstrain revenue, reduce length of stay, and especially it sounds like we can really, everyone talks about how physicians, nurses, you name it, pretty much anyone involved in healthcare is leaving the healthcare system. So how can we use these things to alleviate all those problems?
That's a very tall order to fix it. But it comes to mind, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. You got to fight little fights, and then this fight that you won here, little fight, will blend with the next one, and then they make a big fight, and you make a big win, and you keep blending it. But in my opinion, I think the beginning of our solution needs to be the recognition of the root cause of the problem, like any other quality improvement process. One of my biggest beefs right now, for example, is the issue of burnout, physician burnout. And for that matter, nursing burnout and all kinds of people. That's why they're leaving medicine. Burnout is real. It's very real. Okay? But if you think about what happened in the last few years, the solution, quote unquote, to the burnout that we have been pitched to has been resilience. You have to be more resilient. Well, with due respect, that is like giving flak jackets to a unit that is taking suppressive fire. It's still going to be taking suppressive fire. So it doesn't really make that much sense without looking at the root cause. So until we're willing to look at the solution, at the root cause of the problem, which is in the mirror, it's not out the window. We are the problem. The system is the problem. The system continues to undermine physicians as professionals, nurses as professionals. We've talked about this, the commoditization of medicine. Think about this. The healthcare system does not recognize excellence. It doesn't matter how good of a doctor you are. Medicare is going to pay you exactly the same. So it's a commodity. You're a commodity. A commodity, by definition, is a product that has fungibility, which there is no differentiation between A and B. It's like your gas. When you go pump gas, you can go to Shell, you can go to Phillips 66. It's gas. So what is the motivation to be an excellent physician other than your own personal pride and whatever you want to call it, or doing a good job? Is that at the end of the day, you can't buy more groceries like that way. So the system really is, and on top of that, then you have all of these non-value adding steps that you have to go through, not to get paid, but to get reimbursed. And then think about this. You go to Walmart and you buy $100 worth of products. And on your way out, On the checkout, the woman in the counter says, you owe us $100. And you say, well, I'm only going to give you 60, and you have to take it. And if you don't take it, then we're going to have problems with the law. Well, that's what Medicare and the system does right now. It doesn't matter what people think. Doctors make millions and millions of dollars. It doesn't matter what we charge. It doesn't matter what it is whatever the system decides that we're going to get reimbursed, not paid, reimbursed at a posterior. And then there is the insurance game, denials, and the peer reviews, and all of these other games. All of that is non-value added. All of that is stifling throughput, changing things, and it doesn't make for a good motivation and increased burnout. It's all related. So we got to look at, so how do we deal with it? We deal with it one bite at a time, like the elephant. You got to play small battles, one at a time. Try to convince the people around you in your immediate environment that things like theory of constraint are worth pursuing, because at the end of the day, I am convinced that applying theory of constraints decreases burnout. To the question that you asked me earlier, I think burnout goes down. Why? Because everybody is aligned to a value-added process, a process that is as streamlined as it can, and it increases throughput. And the idea isn't to work harder, it's to work smarter and to get the throughput going. And I think that by reprioritizing what we want to do, I think everybody's better. I hope that sort of answers your question in some way.
Yeah, I think what your definition of that is really by aligning physicians to actually use their time wisely and work on issues or problems that are worth their time, instead of like the running around in circles or doing things that are not like minutia that really isn't beneficial to anyone. If someone's time is utilized well and they feel it's utilized well, then they don't burn out because they're doing what they feel is providing the most value.
Absolutely. I mean, the key, one of the things that I learned, if nothing else, in medicine after all these years, is the key to health is happiness. Think about it. Happy people don't get very sick. They're happy. And unhappy people, we can't make them better. No matter what you try, they're unhappy. So unless you use something like tactical empathy to get to the bottom of why are they, what's making them unhappy, you're not going to make an impact on that patient. The same is true for physicians and nurses and everybody, every professional, is that if you spend your day spinning your wheels on processes that somebody concocted in somewhere because they don't have a really good idea what happens at the bedside, and they think it's a good idea, but it isn't, it just adds to the problem. And one of the things that I find most remarkable is when I went to business school, you went to business school too, so you have an idea. Project Management 101. One of the first things you're taught in project management is engage the stakeholders. And yet, you wake up one Monday morning, you come to work, and there's a new initiative that affects you that nobody talked to you about. Nobody asked your opinion about. Nobody asked, okay, what kind of impact is that going to have on what you do? Is this a good idea? It's a de facto notion that it is a great idea and you have to take it. Well, that's a real problem. One of the things that seems to be a topic of conversation is electronic medical records. And as we wrote in that book years ago, electronic medical records is the greatest idea with the worst possible execution I have seen in history. It's a great idea. I mean, we wrote, when I was at the University of Alabama in the 90s, we actually wrote in-house our own electronic medical record. We had our own system. In fact, we had a laptop that we strapped to a pole that we walked around before these computers on wheels were anywhere. And it was a hybrid system, but we wrote it ourselves. We constructed it ourselves because it was the right thing to do at the time. And then, of course, it all came around. But without being mindful of how the workflow of a physician needs to change in order to use the electronic medical record to his advantage and by extension to the advantage of the patient, it becomes a burden. And this is what people are claiming about, is that it is a real problem spending my time documenting things.
That's well put. I like. Well, I mean, I like the way you put that. Even though it's sad, but it's true. It's the great idea with the worst implementation. And I know you have to get to rounds, so I'll wrap it up here. And everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. And Dr. Gomez, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for the invitation. Let me know if I can be of any help.
Thank you. Yeah.